In a workshop forgotten by the city, an old mechanic watches his last chance slip away, until an unexpected act by a homeless man reveals that true skill goes far beyond technical knowledge. From that moment on, a chain of empathy begins, powerful enough to transform lives through the quiet force of kindness. In the Riverside district, a forgotten outskirt of Riverton, between a poorly maintained junkyard and an abandoned tire shop, stood Mr. Sebastian Oliver's garage. The faded sign, New Dawn Mechanics, seemed to mock the reality of the place. At 68 years old, Sebastian no longer had the steady hands that once made him the most sought-after mechanic in the region. His fingers, now trembling with age and rheumatism, still tried to hold screwdrivers and pliers with dignity, tools that for decades had guaranteed his family's livelihood. The small office, with peeling walls and a calendar stuck on 2018, housed a pile of overdue bills. The most recent notice from the National Bank announced the auction of the property in 3 days due to default on a loan Sebastian had taken out to modernize the workshop 5 years prior, an investment that yielded no return, as dealerships and authorized service centers would soon swallow up small businesses like his. "Mr. Sebastian, I brought you a coffee," said Mrs. Clare, his neighbor from the diner next door. One of the few people who still cared about the old mechanic. "Thank you, Claire. You and this coffee are what keep me going," he replied with a tired smile, quickly hiding the collection letters in the drawer. "Still no movement today?" she asked, looking at the empty yard where queues of cars used to wait for service. "That Fiat from last week was the only job this month. Barely enough to buy food," Sebastian confessed, blowing on the hot coffee. "Cars today are all computerized. No one wants an old man who barely knows how to use a smartphone." The sun scorched the asphalt when a powerful rumble cut through the street's quietness. A gleaming, imposing black SUV stood out completely from the scene of simple houses and modest businesses. The vehicle parked in front of the garage with precise movements, leaving a small cloud of dust that made Sebastian and Claire cough. From the driver's door stepped a man of approximately 50, wearing an impeccable Italian suit and designer sunglasses. Richard Mendoza was the kind of person who graced business magazine covers and economic sections. Owner of the largest chain of luxury car dealerships in the southern part of the country, his face was marked by barely contained irritation. "Can anyone help me in this middle of nowhere?" he shouted, looking around with disdain. Sebastian placed his cup on the table and slowly walked to the yard. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you?" Richard removed his sunglasses, revealing cold eyes that scrutinized the old mechanic from head to toe. "My car started having a strange fault. I was going to a meeting in Greenfield when the engine began to fluctuate. The GPS brought me here as the nearest garage. What problem exactly is it presenting?" Sebastian asked, trying to maintain professional composure in front of the evidently wealthy client. "If I knew, I'd fix it myself," Richard replied ironically. "The dashboard indicates some problem with the injection system, but my driver is sick, and I'm driving alone. I need you to check and fix this immediately. I have a meeting in 2 hours that will define the future of millions." Sebastian swallowed hard. He knew that model was completely digital, with systems his outdated equipment couldn't even diagnose. His eyes scanned the almost empty garage, with old tools and no modern diagnostic computer. "Sir," he began, choosing his words carefully. "Mendoza." "Richard Mendoza," the businessman interrupted, as if the name should mean something. "Mr. Mendoza, I'm afraid I don't have the necessary equipment to diagnose cars like yours. It would be better to look for the authorized dealership in the city center. I can call a tow truck for you." Richard's face transformed into a mask of disbelief. "Are you telling me this isn't even a real garage? How can the GPS indicate a place that can't do the basics?" Mrs. Clare, watching the scene from the diner door, felt her heart ache for her friend. Sebastian was a proud man who had built his life around that garage. "Sir, I've worked with cars for over 45 years. This is a real garage. I just don't have the electronic devices your car requires," Sebastian explained, his voice slightly trembling. "Times have changed and you haven't changed with them, apparently," Richard finished with contempt. "I can't waste my time. See, I'll call a private tow truck." As Richard pulled out his latest generation cell phone, a silent figure approached from the opposite side of the street. A man of approximately 40, unshaven and in simple but clean clothes, carried a worn backpack on his back. His walk was calm, almost imperceptible. Local residents knew him only as Nate, the wanderer who roamed the neighborhood streets looking for odd jobs, water, or food. Nate stopped a few feet away, observing the scene. His deep, attentive brown eyes fixed on the luxurious SUV's open hood. "Can I take a look?" he said in a voice that, though low, carried surprising confidence. 3 pairs of eyes turned to him simultaneously. Richard assessed him with a mixture of surprise and disdain. Sebastian felt a pang of embarrassment at having his space invaded. Claire merely watched, curious. "And who might you be?" Richard asked with a scoffing smile. "Just someone who understands cars," Nate replied, undeterred by the businessman's tone. Richard looked at Sebastian, then at the simple man in front of him, and let out a short, dry laugh. "First a mechanic without equipment, now well, whatever you are. This is my lucky day." Nate remained impassive. "Do you want to fix the car's problem, or do you prefer to wait hours for a tow truck?" The businessman consulted his wristwatch, visibly impatient. His expression fluctuated between irritation and resignation. "I have a crucial meeting in Greenfield. Every minute is worth money." "Then there's not much to lose, is there?" Nate replied, calmly approaching the vehicle. Richard reluctantly stepped back, making a dramatic gesture towards the car. "Be my guest. If you make it worse, you'll pay for the repairs at the dealership." Without responding to the provocation, Nate approached the exposed engine. His movements were precise and methodical. Unlike what everyone expected, he didn't immediately grab tools. He closed his eyes for a moment, just listening to the engine idling. Sebastian watched with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. He knew Nate by sight, as someone who occasionally asked for water at the garage or helped with small tasks around the neighborhood in exchange for a few coins. He had never imagined he had mechanical knowledge. The street was silent, except for the irregular purr of the luxury engine. Nate brought his ear close to the compartment, as if conversing with the machine. His fingers delicately traced components and connections. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching us from. We'll continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear. Richard checked his watch every minute, huffing with impatience. His cell phone rang several times, but he merely silenced the calls without answering. Mr. Sebastian remained at a respectful distance, curiously observing Nate's methodical movements. "Can you speed this up? Or at least pretend you're doing something useful?" Richard provoked, crossing his arms. Nate didn't respond. His fingers traced connections, touched components as if he could read the vehicle through touch. After a few minutes, he pointed to a specific area near the sensor block. "Can I use some tools?" he asked Sebastian, who nodded and gestured towards his toolbox. "Help yourself to whatever you need." "A young man," the old mechanic replied. Nate selected only a small Phillips screwdriver and precision tweezers. With surprisingly delicate movements for his large hands, he reached an almost invisible point between the electronic components. "The problem is a loose oxygen sensor connection," he explained, working carefully. "It's causing incorrect readings for the central unit. The system enters protection mode, reducing power." Richard approached, incredulous. "Impossible. A car of this level wouldn't have such a basic fault." "Actually," Nate replied without taking his eyes off his work, "the more sophisticated the system, the more vulnerable it is to small faults. A single poorly fitted connector can compromise the entire assembly." In less than 15 minutes, with just those 2 simple tools, Nate reconnected and secured the sensor. He carefully closed the compartment he had opened and asked Richard to start the engine. The powerful roar of the engine now sounded perfectly harmonious. The digital dashboard no longer displayed alerts. Richard accelerated a few times, testing the car's response, which reacted with precision. His expression fluctuated between relief and distrust. "It's fixed," he admitted reluctantly. "It's fixed," Nate confirmed simply. "The car is ready for your trip." Richard took his wallet from the inside pocket of his jacket. "How much do I owe you for this service?" Nate shook his head. "Nothing. I just wanted to help." The businessman frowned as if he had heard something in an unknown language. "Everyone wants something. What's your price?" "Not every service needs payment," Nate replied. "Some things we do just because we can help." That answer seemed to unsettle Richard more than any provocation could. He looked at the money in his hand, then at the simple man in front of him, unable to process that refusal. His world, built on transactions, profits, and advantages, did not accommodate acts of gratuitous kindness. The tension was interrupted by the sound of another arrival. A sports motorcycle parked next to the SUV. From it dismounted a young man of approximately 30, wearing a leather jacket with the Mendoza Dealership Network logo. "Uncle Richard." "I finally found you," exclaimed the young man, removing his helmet and revealing a face that bore familiar features to the businessman's. "You didn't answer my calls. Philip, what are you doing here?" Richard asked, putting his wallet away. "When I saw you were late for the meeting, I tracked your car with the app," Philip explained, showing his phone. "The system showed a fault code. I came to help." Richard gestured towards the vehicle. "This gentleman has already solved the problem." Philip observed Nate with professional distrust. His gaze swept over the simple garage environment and the old tools. "What was the problem?" "Loose oxygen sensor connection," Nate replied. The young man let out a scoffing laugh. "Impossible. This model has shielded sensors with pressure connectors. They don't just come loose like that." Philip walked to the car, ignoring the work already done. From his backpack, he took out a tablet and a small device that he connected to the vehicle's diagnostic port. The screen lit up, showing data and technical diagrams. "Let me check this properly. I have all the certifications from German factories. I'm an expert in high-performance vehicles." Nate tried to intervene. "The car is already working perfectly. Maybe it's better not to tamper with what—" "Please," Philip interrupted arrogantly. "Leave the technical work to trained professionals." Richard consulted his watch again. "Just be quick, Philip. I'm already late." Excited to demonstrate his knowledge, Philip began performing advanced diagnostic tests. His fingers glided confidently across the tablet screen. "I'm going to optimize the entire system. When I'm done, this car will be better than new." While working, he monologued about his technical training, the international courses he had taken, and how modern technology had rendered old-fashioned methods obsolete. Every word seemed like a small barb directed at both Sebastian and Nate. After several minutes of configuration, Philip smiled, satisfied. "There we go. I've reprogrammed the parameters for better performance. Let's test it." Richard got into the vehicle and turned the key. The engine coughed, hesitated, and then emitted an irregular sound. The dashboard lights came on again, now with even more alerts than before. "That's normal," Philip assured, though his tone no longer carried the same confidence. "System adapting to the new settings." The engine continued to run unstably. Philip, now visibly nervous, reconnected the tablet. "I don't understand. I need to reset the entire system." "Perhaps we should revert to the previous configuration," Nate suggested calmly. "I know what I'm doing," Philip retorted, frantically typing commands into the tablet. "I'm going to do a full reset and reinstall the firmware." What happened next occurred in a matter of seconds. The car's dashboard screen went completely blank. A sharp sound of overloaded electrical components filled the air, followed by the characteristic odor of burnt circuits. The engine shut down abruptly. A heavy silence fell over the place. Philip stared stunned at the tablet, which displayed a critical error message. Richard got out of the vehicle, his face a mask of contained fury. "What did you do to my car?" he asked, each word pronounced slowly. Philip swallowed hard. "It seems there was an overload in the injection module during reprogramming." It's a rare event, but in other words, you broke what was already working," Richard completed. His voice surprisingly did not rise. It was a kind of cold, calculated anger, even more intimidating. Nate approached the vehicle again, analyzing the situation. "The main injection module likely burned out from the overload. Without it, the car won't run." "And how long will that take to fix?" Richard asked, already knowing his meeting was definitively compromised. "A new module needs to be ordered from the factory," Philip explained, pale. "Then it needs to be programmed with the specific parameters for this vehicle." "Maybe a week." Richard took a deep breath, visibly controlling his anger. His gaze alternated between his embarrassed nephew and the now completely inoperable car. Decades of training in difficult negotiations allowed him to maintain composure, but his eyes betrayed the internal storm. "A week," he repeated, as if testing the word. "A meeting that could define the company's future lost, all because you needed to prove you're smarter than everyone." Philip bowed his head without arguments. His uncle had never been particularly affectionate or understanding of mistakes, even small ones. This was far from small. The tense atmosphere was broken by Nate's calm voice. "Perhaps there's a temporary solution." All eyes turned to him. "The module is damaged, but the auxiliary system should still be working," he explained. "With the right equipment, I could reprogram it to take over some functions of the main module. It wouldn't be a permanent solution, but it would allow the car to operate in a limited mode, enough to get to an authorized center or even greenfield." "And where will we get this right equipment?" Richard questioned, clearly skeptical. Nate looked at Philip. "Your nephew has the necessary scanner and software. I know the emergency reprogramming procedure. If we work together, we can solve this." Philip hesitated, his wounded pride fighting against the practical need to fix the mistake he had made. Are you sure you can do this?" "I'm sure," Nate affirmed with a serenity that contrasted with the moment's tension. "But we need to start immediately." Philip cast a questioning look at his uncle, who responded with a resigned nod. "Do whatever it takes. We have no alternative." Without wasting time, Nate and Philip began working together. Mr. Sebastian provided a covered space in the small garage shed where the SUV was pushed by everyone. Mrs. Clare, realizing the situation would take time, brought a thermos of coffee and some snacks from her diner. The contrast between the two men working was visible. Philip, with his state-of-the-art tablet and professional diagnostic scanner, represented modern technology, formal education, privilege. Nate, with his calloused hands and intuitive knowledge, symbolized another kind of wisdom, forged by experience and necessity. "I'll access the auxiliary system," Philip explained, connecting his equipment, "but I don't know the contingency parameters for this model." "Let the system enter diagnostic mode first," Nate calmly instructed. "Then we need to locate the memory addresses of the auxiliary module." Richard watched from a distance, arms crossed, in a posture that mixed impatience and curiosity. The phone continued to vibrate in his pocket, but now he occasionally answered, briefly explaining he was dealing with a mechanical setback. For someone accustomed to controlling all variables, that situation represented a deep discomfort. As Philip navigated the system's technical menus, Nate explained each step with surprising clarity. There was no arrogance in his instructions, just the objective transmission of knowledge. At times, it was almost as if he spoke the language of machines, predicting system responses even before they appeared on screen. "How do you know all this?" Philip asked after an hour of working together, his curiosity finally overcoming his wounded pride. Nate smiled slightly, without taking his eyes off the screen where codes and diagrams alternated. "I worked for 15 years at Autotech, manufacturing electronic modules for export. I knew every component, every line of code. The revelation hung in the air like a piece that didn't fit the puzzle." Richard, who had been following the conversation, approached. "Autotech, the one that closed about 8 years ago?" he asked, suddenly interested. Nate nodded as he adjusted a parameter in the system. "That's the one." "And how does a former employee of one of the largest automotive electronic component manufacturers end up?" Richard hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't sound offensive. "On the streets?" Nate completed without showing discomfort. "Life sometimes takes unexpected turns, Mr. Mendoza." There was something in the way Nate pronounced the surname that made Richard narrow his eyes, as if trying to recall something important. The moment was interrupted by an exclamation from Philip. "We did it! The auxiliary system is responding." Indeed, the vehicle's dashboard had partially lit up. The engine still wasn't running, but the first obstacle had been overcome. Nate smiled discreetly, satisfied with the progress. "Now we need to redirect the main module's functions to the secondary one," he explained. "It's like teaching an assistant to do the boss's job. It won't be perfect, but it will work." For 2 more hours, the improbable duo worked with increasing synergy. Philip, initially resistant, gradually began to absorb the knowledge shared by Nate. His arrogance gave way to a genuine interest in the unconventional methods the man employed. "Most technicians just follow protocols," Nate commented, as they finalized a complex sequence of commands. "But cars are like organisms. Each one responds uniquely, has its own personality. In factories, they teach us they are precise, predictable machines," Philip countered. typing a sequence suggested by Nate. And they are. In perfect laboratory conditions, Nate agreed. But in the real world, with dust, variable temperature, where each car develops peculiarities, you have to listen to them. Richard, who kept his distance from the technical aspects, couldn't help but notice how that philosophy contrasted with his own business approach. Over the years, he had transformed dealerships into standardized, mechanized operations, where every employee followed rigid protocols. Efficient, yes, but devoid of that intuitive understanding he was now witnessing. Finally, after almost 4 hours of intense work, the decisive moment arrived. "It's ready for the test," Philip announced, disconnecting the devices. "Uncle, you can try to start it now." Richard got into the vehicle and turned the key. The engine coughed a few times, hesitated, but then came to life with a steady hum, though less powerful than normal. "It worked!" Philip exclaimed, genuine joy replacing the stress of the previous hours. In emergency mode, Nate explained, carefully observing its operation. Acceleration will be limited to 80%, and some comfort functions won't work. But it's enough to get to Greenfield or an authorized dealership. Richard got out of the car, his expression serious, but with something new in his gaze. "Impressive work," he admitted. "How much do I owe you both?" Philip began to mention figures, but Nate interrupted him. "For me, nothing," he said, wiping his hands on a cloth Sebastian had provided. Helping was enough. Again, Richard faced that disconcerting answer. His world of commercial transactions did not comprehend the logic of generosity without reciprocity. "Everyone wants something," he insisted, now more curious than challenging. "Not always," Nate replied. "Some gifts don't need a return." Before the conversation could continue, Mr. Sebastian timidly approached. The old mechanic had observed everything with a mixture of admiration and growing despair. His trembling hands held a crumpled paper, the eviction notice. "I know it's not my business," he began, addressing Richard. "But you seem to be an influential man. My garage will be auctioned in 3 days because of a debt to the bank. If you could intercede." Richard's expression immediately hardened. This was familiar territory, someone trying to gain an advantage from his position. "I'm sorry for your situation, but I don't get involved in other people's business." Sebastian lowered his gaze, ashamed of his own audacity. Nate, who was putting away the borrowed tools, paused his action. "Mr. Sebastian is an honorable man," he said in a calm but firm voice. "He doesn't deserve to lose his life's work." "And what do you suggest? That I pay a stranger's debt?" Richard replied ironically. Nate held his gaze for a long moment. "I didn't suggest anything. I merely stated a fact." Richard looked away first, inexplicably bothered. "Anyway, thank you for your help. Now I need to continue my journey." Philip, sensing the tension, quickly put away his equipment. "The car needs a full inspection soon," he explained professionally. "This is just a temporary solution." Richard nodded, getting into the vehicle. Before closing the door, he took a wad of bills from his wallet and extended it to Sebastian. "For the use of the space. It's not charity, it's fair payment." The old mechanic, after a moment of hesitation, accepted the money with a nod of gratitude. Richard started the car and, without another word, drove the vehicle out of the garage. Philip stayed behind, finishing putting away his equipment. There was an evident restlessness in his movements, as if something important had been left unfinished. "Did you really work at Autotech?" he asked Nate as he closed his tool case. "For 15 years, Nate confirmed. So I started on the assembly line and became a development supervisor." "And what happened?" Nate was silent for a few moments, his gaze lost somewhere distant. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of painful memories. "I made a mistake. A big mistake." The unexpected confession created a moment of vulnerability Philip hadn't anticipated. "What kind of mistake?" "The kind that destroys careers and families." Nate paused as if deciding how much to reveal. "During the development of a new injection system, I identified a potential flaw. I warned my superiors, but they decided to proceed with the launch. A large international sale was planned." Philip nodded, beginning to understand. "And you didn't agree with that." "I falsified test documents to prevent certification," Nate admitted. "It was discovered. I lost my job, my reputation, everything. My father was the company's technical director." "Your father?" Philip repeated, stunned by the revelation. Nate nodded, his face serene despite the harshness of the memory. Paul Mendoza, the same surname as your uncle, not by coincidence. The information hit Philip like a physical blow. Paul Mendoza had been a legend in the automotive sector, co-founder of Autotech, and indeed Richard Mendoza's brother. The pieces began to fall into place. So you are Agnaldo Mendoza. Nate was just the childhood nickname my father used, he completed with a sad smile. Before he disowned me and kicked me out of the house for betraying the family business. Philip needed to sit on the nearby workbench. That simple man who lived on the streets was actually his cousin, a relative the family never mentioned, as if he had never existed. Does your uncle know who you are? He recognized my name, I'm sure, but it's been so long. Maybe he prefers to think it's a coincidence. Nate, or rather Agnaldo, shrugged. I didn't expect to find him, nor did I want to. I just saw someone needing help and did what I could. At the other end of the garage, Mr. Sebastian continued to stare at the bills in his hand. The amount was considerable, but far short of what was needed to save his garage from the imminent auction. With a resigned sigh, he put the money in the worn pocket of his flannel shirt. At least it pays for the month's groceries, he murmured to himself. Mrs. Clare, who had returned to the diner during the repair, approached again. So, Sebastian, is that big shot going to help with the bank? The old mechanic shook his head negatively. People like him don't mix with people like us, Claire. It was just a twist of fate that brought him here today. The woman placed her hand on his shoulder in a gesture of silent solidarity. Both knew that in 3 days, New Dawn Mechanics would be just a memory. The name on the sign, chosen decades earlier with so much optimism, now seemed a cruel irony. Philip, still processing the revelations about his hitherto unknown cousin, approached the old mechanic. How much is the debt, Mr. Sebastian? The man hesitated, as if the amount were a personal shame. 128,000, with accumulated interest. I took out the loan to modernize the garage, buy new equipment. But then came the pandemic, then the crisis. I couldn't keep up with the installments. Philip nodded, understanding. That was the story of so many small business owners. The dream of growth interrupted by circumstances beyond control, turned into a nightmare of insurmountable debts. And did you try to renegotiate with the bank? So many times I've lost count, Sebastian replied with resignation. But they always demand a down payment that I can't afford. Philip remained silent, reflecting. His uncle certainly had the means to resolve that situation with a single phone call, but he knew Richard's temperament too well to harbor hopes. The businessman had built his empire on cold, never emotional decisions. Situations like that were, in his view, the market naturally regulating itself. Meanwhile, on the road to Greenfield, Richard drove with heightened attention. The car was running at its limit, as Nate had predicted. Something about that unexpected encounter deeply disturbed him. The mention of the Mendoza name, the extraordinary technical knowledge, the familiar facial features, everything pointed to a conclusion he was reluctant to accept. Agnaldo, he murmured to himself, testing the name he hadn't spoken in years. Could it really be him? The rebellious nephew who had defied his own father, causing a scandal that almost destroyed the family business. Richard still remembered his brother Paul's fury upon discovering the sabotage. My own son, he had shouted on the phone that distant night. He falsified reports to prevent the certification of the new system. He says it was unsafe, that it could cause accidents, as if he knew more than the entire engineering team. At the time, Richard had advised his brother to sue the young man, make an example of him. Paul chose a different punishment: disinherit his son, expel him from the family, ensure he never worked in the sector again. Let him learn to live without the Mendoza money, were his final words on the matter. The irony was not lost on Richard. The system developed at that time did indeed present serious flaws, months after its launch, exactly as young Agnaldo had warned. A multi-million-dollar recall and several lawsuits for accidents almost led Autotech to bankruptcy. Paul never recovered from the double blow, his son's betrayal and the subsequent proof that he was right. He died 3 years later, a bitter and defeated man. And now, by an absurd coincidence, Richard had re-encountered his estranged nephew. Not as the promising young engineer of yesteryear, but as a man living on the streets, yet still maintaining his dignity and knowledge intact. Even more disturbing was Agnaldo's demonstrated kindness. He had certainly recognized his uncle, but showed no resentment. On the contrary, he helped him when he could easily have sought revenge by revealing his identity or simply turning his back. Those thoughts accompanied Richard throughout the journey. The meeting in Greenfield, so important hours ago, now seemed trivial in the face of the emotional storm he was confronting. Back at Mr. Sebastian's garage, Philip finally broke the silence that had settled. "You could have told us who you were, at least to receive what you're owed." Agnaldo shook his head, putting away the last tools. "I want nothing from the Mendoza family. I've learned there are values more important than money or a name. But you could have a better life. You wouldn't have to live on the streets, sleep in shelters." "Who says I don't have a good life?" Agnaldo replied with a genuine smile. "I have freedom, peace of mind, I do what I like when the opportunity arises. I help people without expecting anything in return. There are many forms of wealth, cousin." The word cousin made Philip realize the reality of that kinship. For how many years had he grown up without knowing of this man's existence? How many family stories had been sanitized, erasing Agnaldo's presence? "What will you do now?" Philip asked, genuinely interested. "The same as always. Follow my path." Agnaldo extended his hand to say goodbye. "It was good working with you. You have the potential to be more than a technician who just follows manuals." Philip shook the offered hand, feeling a connection that transcended the newly discovered kinship. Can I find you again? I have so much to learn, not just about cars." The question caught Agnaldo by surprise. His face, marked by life on the streets, softened. "I'll be around. This neighborhood is my territory." And then, after a pause, "It would be good to talk more." With a final wave, Agnaldo picked up his worn backpack and headed for the exit. Philip watched him leave, torn between following his newly found cousin or staying at the garage. He opted for the latter, still trying to process everything that had happened. Mr. Sebastian had returned to the small office in the back, where he was reviewing old papers, invoices, notes, memories of better times. Claire's silent presence beside him was his only comfort. "What will you do after?" "You know," she asked gently, "I have a nephew in Oakwood. Maybe he'll take me in for a while until I find some odd job." The old mechanic's voice trembled slightly. 50 years in this place, Claire. I started as an assistant to the old owner, then bought the business when he retired. I saw this neighborhood grow around the garage." Claire squeezed his wrinkled hand. She knew that pain well. Her late husband had been a loyal customer of the garage for decades. Philip appeared at the office door, hesitant. "Mr. Sebastian, I was thinking, would you allow me to look at the debt documents?" "Perhaps there's some clause, some loophole." The old man nodded without much hope. "Be my guest, young man, but I've already consulted 2 lawyers. They say there's nothing to be done." As Philip analyzed the papers, a plan began to form in his mind. It wasn't just about saving a garage. It was about honoring the example his newly discovered cousin had demonstrated. Agnaldo's generosity, his ability to listen to machines, his dignity despite adverse circumstances, all of it had touched something deep within Philip. For hours he pored over the documents, making calls, consulting legislation websites. When night fell over the Riverside district, Philip had made his decision. "Mr. Sebastian," he called out to the old mechanic who was already preparing to close the establishment, "would you accept a partner?" The question was so unexpected that Sebastian thought he had misheard. "What do you mean, young man?" "I'm proposing a partnership. I'll invest in paying off the debt and modernizing the space. You contribute your experience and the business location." "Partnership?" Sebastian repeated, incredulous. His tired eyes alternated between Philip and Claire, as if seeking confirmation that he wasn't dreaming. "Why would a young man in your position be interested in a failing business?" Philip smiled, pulling up a chair to sit face to face with the old mechanic. "Because it's not a failing business, Mr. Sebastian. It's a business with untapped potential." Claire observed the scene with a mixture of hope and suspicion. In her experience, offers that seemed too good to be true usually hid some trap. "And what would you gain from this?" she asked protectively. "This place barely keeps Sebastian afloat." "Precisely because it lacks modernization," Philip replied, undeterred. "With adequate equipment to service newer cars, an online presence to attract customers from the region, the potential is enormous." Sebastian scratched his grey beard, still suspicious. "And how much of the partnership do you want?" 50%? 70? 30%, Philip answered promptly. Enough to gradually recoup the investment, but keeping you as the majority partner. After all, the soul of the business is yours. The proposal was too tempting to refuse, but years of hardship had taught Sebastian to be cautious. I need to think about it, talk to my daughter. She understands more about these contracts. Philip nodded, understanding. Of course. We can formalize everything tomorrow with a lawyer, if you accept. But we need to act fast because of the auction deadline. After arranging a time for the next day, Philip said goodbye and left on his motorcycle. Night had already completely fallen over the Riverside district, but a small flame of hope now illuminated what had previously seemed a dark future. Meanwhile, dozens of miles away, Richard Mendoza finally arrived at the hotel in Greenfield, where the business meeting should have taken place hours earlier. Despite all the setbacks, he had managed to reschedule the meeting for breakfast the following day. His luxurious room offered all the comforts money could buy, but the businessman felt strangely restless. He poured himself a drink from the minibar and walked to the balcony. The starry night of the mountain range usually calmed him, but on that occasion, each sip of imported whiskey brought back memories he had tried to bury for years. The image of Agnaldo, or Nate, as he now called himself, persisted in his mind. The nephew the family had rejected, and who, ironically, had demonstrated more integrity than many executives Richard knew. There was something deeply unsettling about seeing someone of his own blood living in such precarious conditions, yet still maintaining a dignity that defied explanation. Even more disturbing was the kindness shown. Agnaldo could easily have sought revenge, refusing help or exposing his uncle to Philip. Instead, he chose to help without asking for anything in return, exemplifying a generosity that Richard, in all his wealth, rarely practiced or witnessed. His cell phone vibrated on the table. It was a message from Philip, informing him he wouldn't be returning home that night. He planned to stay in Riverton to resolve an important matter. Richard frowned, wondering what kind of matter would be so urgent as to keep his nephew in the capital, instead of returning to the family mansion in New Haven. A suspicion began to form in his mind. Had the encounter with Agnaldo also impacted Philip? The young man had always been ambitious and somewhat arrogant, traits Richard himself had encouraged, seeing in them the potential to take over the family business in the future. But today, working side by side with his unknown cousin, something seemed to have changed. Richard went back into the room and opened his laptop. Instead of reviewing the numbers for the next morning's meeting, he found himself searching for old news about Autotech and the scandal involving his nephew. The digital archives revealed headlines he hadn't seen in years. Son of Autotech director reports safety flaws and is fired. Young engineer falsified documents to prevent certification. Company states. Autotech component recall confirms ignored warnings. Shares plummet. The last headline, dated almost 2 years after Agnaldo's expulsion, was particularly painful. Paul Mendoza, Autotech founder, dies at 58 after long depression. Richard abruptly closed the laptop. His brother had never recovered from the double blow, his son's supposed betrayal, and the subsequent confirmation that the young man was right about the flaws. Pride prevented any reconciliation, and Paul carried the weight of that family rupture to his grave. For the first time in a long time, Richard allowed himself to question the decisions made back then. What if they had listened to Agnaldo? If, instead of punishing him for his audacity, they had recognized his legitimate concern for safety? How many lives could have been saved? How much money economized? How much suffering avoided? The night passed slowly for Richard. Between painful memories and unusual reflections, for a man habitually focused only on the future and profits. When the sun rose, revealing the beauty of the mountain landscape through the hotel window, a decision had already formed in his mind. At Mr. Sebastian's garage, the new day began with an atmosphere of tense expectation. The mechanic had spent the night talking on the phone with his daughter Anna, a university professor in Riverton, who initially was skeptical about Philip's proposal. "Dad, you barely know this young man," she had argued. "How can you trust he's not trying to pull some scam?" "He's the nephew of that rich businessman, the owner of the Mendoza dealerships," Sebastian explained. "He has money, position. Why would he be interested in an old garage like mine?" "Precisely for that reason. Dad, It could be some scheme to acquire the business location or launder money. Who knows? But after a long conversation and the promise that Anna would be present for the signing of any document, they reached a consensus. It would be worth at least hearing the details of the proposal. Philip arrived early, accompanied by a serious-looking lawyer carrying a document folder. He introduced himself as Dr. Marcus, specializing in corporate law. Anna, who had driven directly from the university, was already waiting with her father, arms crossed and an analytical expression. "Before we get into the legal details," Philip began, "I'd like to better explain my vision for this place." Using his tablet, he showed images of transformations of similar garages, which had evolved from traditional establishments to modern automotive centers, yet maintaining their welcoming and personalized character. He spoke about diagnostic equipment that could be acquired, specific training for Mr. Sebastian to update his skills, and digital marketing strategies to attract a diverse clientele. "But why here?" Anna questioned, still suspicious. "There are much better locations in the city." "Because this neighborhood needs this service," Philip replied with surprising sincerity, "and because your father has something that cannot be bought, decades of experience and the community's trust." As they discussed the terms of the agreement, Philip noticed unusual activity in the street. People were starting to gather in front of the garage, looking at the sky with expressions of astonishment. The characteristic sound of blades cutting through the air confirmed his suspicions. A helicopter was approaching. "What's happening?" Sebastian asked, getting up with difficulty. Everyone went out to the yard in time to see an executive helicopter, sporting the Mendoza dealership's logo, landing in a nearby empty plot. The dust raised by the blades made everyone shield their eyes. When the blades slowed, the aircraft door opened. Richard Mendoza descended, impeccably dressed in a navy blue suit, followed by a woman in a business suit carrying a briefcase and a man with professional filming equipment. "Uncle?" Philip exclaimed, genuinely surprised. "What are you doing here?" "The meeting in Greenfield." "It was cancelled," Richard replied dryly. His eyes scanned the gathered group, pausing on Sebastian. "You must be the owner of this garage." The old mechanic nodded, intimidated by the businessman's imposing presence and the surreal situation. "Sebastian Oliver at your service." Richard extended his hand for a formal handshake. "Richard Mendoza. I believe we met yesterday under unusual circumstances." "Yes, sir. Your car is being properly repaired at my dealership," Richard completed. "But I didn't come here to talk about the vehicle." At this moment, a man in a suit and tie approached quickly, carrying an official envelope. "Mr. Mendoza, the bailiff has arrived for the repossession." Indeed, a court car had parked on the other side of the street. A serious-faced man was crossing towards the garage, carrying documents and accompanied by 2 police officers. Sebastian's heart raced. Despite the renewed hopes with Philip's proposal, the brutal reality of eviction had arrived. The bailiff approached, verified the location's identification, and addressed the old mechanic directly. "Mr. Sebastian Oliver, I am bailiff Peter Lawson. I am here to execute the order for repossession of this property in favor of the National Bank, as per process number." Richard interrupted the procedure with a polite but firm gesture. "One moment, please. I believe there is a situation that needs clarification." The bailiff looked at him with an impassive expression. "And you are?" "Richard Mendoza, representative of the Mendoza Group." He signaled to the woman in the business suit, who stepped forward and opened her briefcase. "I have documentation here that might be of interest to you." The woman in the business suit extracted a folder with official documents from her briefcase, which Richard handed to the bailiff. "This is proof of full payment of the debt to the National Bank, including interest and penalties. The execution was suspended by court order issued this morning." A murmur ran through the small group of people gathered to watch the scene. Sebastian, stunned, had to lean on Anna to keep from swaying. Philip looked at his uncle with a mixture of surprise and admiration. "Everything seems to be in order," the bailiff confirmed, after carefully examining the documents. "The execution is in fact suspended." He returned the papers and addressed Sebastian. "You were lucky. Congratulations." When the court representatives moved away, a silence charged with expectation filled the air. It was Sebastian who finally broke it. "Why?" he asked, his voice choked. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Richard adjusted his tie knot, visibly uncomfortable with emotional displays. "It's not charity, if that's what you're thinking. It's an investment." He made a sweeping gesture encompassing the garage and its surroundings. "This place has potential, as my nephew correctly identified." Anna, always perceptive, noticed the evasiveness. "With all due respect, Mr. Mendoza, there are hundreds of businesses with potential in Riverton. Why choose my father's garage specifically?" Richard hesitated, something rare for a man accustomed to certainty in every word. His gaze swept across the garage yard, momentarily pausing on each person present, as if searching for something, or someone. "Something unusual happened yesterday," he began, choosing his words carefully. "I met someone who made me question certain certainties." "Are you talking about the man who helped with your car?" Philip asked. "Nate?" Richard nodded slowly. "Or Agnaldo, his real name?" He observed Philip's reaction, who discreetly nodded, confirming he already knew the truth. "I see you two talked." "He told me about the past," Philip admitted. "About Autotech, about the conflict with my grandfather." He hesitated briefly before completing, "about being your nephew." Anna and Sebastian exchanged confused glances, but Richard raised his hand, asking for patience. "It's a long family story that's not relevant now. The important thing is that this encounter made me reflect on choices, on the kind of person I've become." The cameraman, who until then had been discreetly recording the scene, received a signal from Richard and approached, camera in hand. "What I'm about to announce goes beyond this garage," the businessman continued, now with the formality of someone accustomed to public declarations. "It's a project that can transform not just a business, but lives." With a theatrical gesture that didn't match his usual personality, Richard extended his arm as if presenting a vision. "In place of this traditional garage, I propose the creation of the New Dawn Automotive Center, keeping the original name as a tribute to its history. But it won't just be a modernized garage." His eyes shone with genuine enthusiasm. "It will also be a vocational school, a space for social transformation." He took a small remote control from his jacket pocket and pressed a button. The tablet in his assistant's hand lit up, holographically projecting the architectural design of a modern complex, which retained elements of the garage's original facade, but expanded into a two-story building with a contemporary structure. The ground floor will be the garage itself, equipped with the latest in automotive technology. The upper floor will house classrooms and laboratories where young people from the community, vulnerable individuals and ex-offenders, can learn the trade of mechanics, free of charge. The three-dimensional images rotated slowly, showing details of the ambitious project. The small crowd that had formed gasped in astonishment and admiration. But Richard continued, "For this project to be truly transformative, it needs special leadership." His eyes met Sebastian's, someone with experience, community respect, and above all, a generous heart. The old mechanic squeezed his daughter's hand, too emotional to speak. Anna, always the voice of reason, intervened. "It's an extraordinary proposal, Mr. Mendoza, but why my father? You have hundreds of qualified employees in your dealerships. Because your father represents something my network has lost over the years. Humanity and service, seeing beyond the machine." Richard seemed sincere in his response. "And he won't be alone," he gestured towards Philip. "My nephew had already identified the potential of this place independently of me. He will be responsible for the technical and innovation aspects." Philip smiled, visibly proud to have his initiative recognized by his uncle. But there was something more in his smile, the satisfaction of seeing his own ideas amplified in a larger project. "There's still a fundamental piece missing from this puzzle," Richard continued, scanning the small crowd that had gathered. "Someone who combines exceptional technical knowledge with a unique sensitivity to listen to machines." The murmuring grew. Everyone seemed to be searching among those present for the person Richard was referring to. It was Mrs. Clare who spotted him first. "Look, it's Nate." Indeed, the familiar figure of the man was slowly approaching along the same path he had taken the day before. His worn backpack on his back, his calm and observant walk. He stopped a few feet from the group, clearly surprised by the unusual movement. "Agnaldo," Richard called, using his nephew's true name. The man hesitated briefly before approaching. "Uncle Richard," he replied with a formal nod. The encounter between the two men created a moment of palpable tension. Decades of distance, unspoken resentments, diametrically opposed life choices, all of it hung in the air between them. "I have a proposal for you," Richard said without mincing words. Agnaldo offered a tired smile. "I don't need charity, Uncle. It's not charity. It's a reparation." Richard's words surprised everyone, including himself, by their unusual sincerity. "You were right about Autotech's sensors. Your father, my brother, should have listened to you." The mention of his father made Agnaldo briefly look away. The wound, even after so many years, was still open. "The past is the past," he replied with dignity. "I hold no grudge. Even so, I want to offer what should have been yours from the beginning." Richard made a sweeping gesture towards the holographic projection that was still rotating, showing the project. "This center will be more than a garage or a school. It will be a space for redemption, for this community and for our family." He explained the project in detail, emphasizing the social aspect, free vocational training, opportunities for marginalized people, the chance to transform lives through technical knowledge. He concluded by extending his hand to his nephew. "I want you to be the technical director and lead instructor. No one has your skill or sensitivity." Agnaldo looked at the outstretched hand with visible hesitation. Years of living on the streets had taught him to distrust seemingly generous offers. Why now, after so long? It was Philip who intervened, placing himself beside his cousin. "Because yesterday you showed us something important. To all of us. That knowledge without humility is arrogance. That technique without intuition is limited. That helping without expecting anything in return is true greatness." The young man's sincere words seemed to touch Agnaldo more deeply than Richard's luxurious proposal or promises. Still, his hesitation persisted. "What if it doesn't work out? What if people don't trust someone like me?" "We'll take it one step at a time," Sebastian replied, joining the conversation. "I started in this garage as an assistant, sweeping the floor. Today, thanks to a miracle I still don't fully understand, I can continue here. We all deserve a second chance." Agnaldo's expression softened at the old mechanic's words. There was a mutual understanding between them that transcended social or generational differences. Respect for the trade, for the dignity of a job well done. Just when it seemed Agnaldo would finally yield, he raised his hand in a request for a pause. "There's something I need to know first," his gaze fixed directly on Richard's eyes. "My daughter. Do you have any news of her?" The question dropped like a bomb in the small circle. Philip's eyes widened, clearly unaware of this aspect of the family history. Richard seemed momentarily unsettled. "Your daughter?" he repeated, genuinely surprised. "Catherine," Agnaldo confirmed. "She was only 3 years old when I was expelled from the family. My ex-wife Marcia took her when we separated shortly after. She said she didn't want our daughter to grow up with a failure." The pain in his voice was palpable. "I tried to locate them for years, but without resources or contacts, I lost them." Richard was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice trembled slightly, something extraordinary for a man known for his emotional coolness. "Catherine Mendoza has a degree in mechanical engineering from the State University of Riverton. She has been working in our company's development division for 2 years. It was Agnaldo's turn to go pale. "You knew all this time?" "No," Richard replied sincerely. "She was hired on her own merit, through a regular selection process. She only recently mentioned being your daughter. When I asked about her surname, she said she had been looking for you for years." "She knows I'm just on the streets," Richard completed. "She knows. And she never stopped looking for you." He signaled to his assistant, who quickly typed something on her phone. "In fact, she's on her way." As if responding to a theatrical cue, an executive car parked near the helicopter. From it stepped a young woman of approximately 28, wearing an elegant women's suit. Her eyes, the same brown shade as Agnaldo's, anxiously scanned the group until she found whom she was looking for. "Dad?" she called, her voice mixing uncertainty and hope. Time seemed to freeze at that instant. Agnaldo remained motionless, as if fearing that any movement might dispel that vision. The young woman took the first step, then another, until she finally ran towards him. The embrace that followed left not a single dry eye among those present. Father and daughter, separated by cruel circumstances for over 2 decades, finally reunited in a moment that transcended words. "I looked for you everywhere," Catherine sobbed, clinging to her father as if she feared losing him again. "When Mum passed away 5 years ago, I found your letters, all returned unopened. Only then did I know the truth." Agnaldo, the man who had faced life on the streets with unwavering dignity, now wept unreservedly. "My daughter, my little one." That unexpected reunion sealed the fate of the project. There was no way Agnaldo could refuse, not when the future offered not only professional purpose, but the chance to rebuild long-broken family ties. 6 months later, the New Dawn Automotive Center and Vocational School was inaugurated with a ceremony that attracted authorities, businessmen and, most importantly, residents of the Riverside district. The building, true to the original vision, preserved elements of Mr. Sebastian's old garage while incorporating cutting-edge technology and modern educational spaces. The inauguration ceremony featured a symbolic moment, the presentation of the first vocational training certificate to John Paul, a 19-year-old who had completed a socio-educational measure and found a chance for a new beginning in the program. The document was handed to him by Agnaldo, now transformed into a different man, not by his external appearance, as he maintained simplicity in dress and speech, but by the renewed light in his eyes. At the microphone visibly moved, Agnaldo addressed the audience, filling the new school's courtyard. "For years, I walked the streets of this city, believing the world owed me something. That life had been unfair, that I deserved more." His voice, normally calm, vibrated with contained emotion. "Today I understand that it was I who owed the world hope, forgiveness, kindness." His gaze swept over the audience until it found specific faces: Sebastian, now internship coordinator; Philip, director of innovation; Richard, financier and mentor of the project; and especially Catherine, who now worked alongside her father as an automotive electronics instructor. There is no mystery or magic in transformation. Whether of a broken car, a bankrupt garage, or an interrupted life, it's just a matter of finding the right connection, tightening what is loose, reconnecting what was separated. A genuine smile lit up his face, and most importantly, listening. Listening to the engine, listening to the heart, listening to others. The simple yet profound words touched each person present in a unique way. For some, it was the promise of concrete opportunities through vocational training. For others, the inspiration of seeing a social project born from an improbable encounter. For the Mendoza family, it was the beginning of a reconciliation that had seemed impossible. The waiting list for the center's first cycle of courses exceeded all expectations. Ex-offenders, vulnerable young people, women heads of household, people traditionally excluded from the specialized job market found there not only technical training, but also welcome and dignity. In a discreet corner of the new garage, a small plaque was preserved, the old New Dawn Mechanics sign, now a little less faded thanks to careful restoration work. Below it, a simple phrase suggested by Agnaldo: "The greatest tool is not in the toolbox, but in the heart of the one who fixes." Dear listeners, we hope that Agnaldo's story and his journey of redemption have touched your hearts. To follow other equally moving narratives, we have prepared a special playlist with stories of overcoming and new beginnings. Find it here by clicking on the left side of the screen. If you enjoyed this story of transformation on the streets of Riverton, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the depths of the human soul and the capacity to start anew. We await you in the comments to share your impressions of the New Dawn Center and similar stories you may know. Until our next emotional journey,